Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. In this episode, I will pick up where I left off with a review of the things that I discussed in the previous podcast. So again, this episode will be on socialism from below, third worldism, indigenism, but I will put a different slant on it. And then in conclusion, I will relate that concept to the student protest movement, not only in the US, not only in Canada, but throughout the world. So to begin, socialism from below, a transcendential concept, meaning it is not the property of any one tendency. It is used by Marxist-Leninists, by Maoists, by democratic socialists, by social democrats, and a whole bunch of other people as well. And basic idea. And in a way, it's kind of intuitive, and it really should not even require a new term, but I think using the new term is important for emphasis. So, socialism from below. What is below? What is below? What does below mean? Okay. Below refers to the proletariat and the subaltern. Now, any communist or socialist would obviously agree with that communism or socialism is for the proletariat and the subaltern and against the bourgeoisie. But still, the term socialism from below, aside from having a nice ring to it, at least in my head, emphasizes the importance of opposition, the kind of oppositional nature of socialism or communism. It is not a gradualist thing, even though some gradualists have adopted the term socialism from below. It is revolution. And in any genuine revolution, you have to have us and them. Yes, us and them. A lot of people don't like that term, but why not? I mean, there is an us and them. And who created that? Well, it wasn't the subaltern or the proletariat. So who did it? Ah, it was the bourgeoisie. Yes, it is to their advantage that they have positions of power. So despite getting elected into office on promises of creating greater equality, of giving more to the underprivileged, to the forgotten people of the world, generally, once they are in those positions of power, that is the last thing on their mind. In the US, particularly, what people seem to do as soon as they are elected is to turn around and try to find ways of giving money to their donors. Their donors, who are often billionaires. They are not poor. They are not forgotten. They are people with everything that one could imagine. And yet they want more, more and more and more and more. They are like children who refuse to share, but even worse, because they are adults and they should know better. They should know that you cannot have a well-functioning society when you only have a small number of people, sometimes referred to as the 1%, who has all the resources of that society, whereas the 99% has none. But that is the world that we have made. That is the world that we have right here in the US, and I see it every day. It saddens me greatly, And I genuinely wish that I, as an individual, I'm not talking about as a member of a group, but as an individual, could change it. But I can't. What can I do as an individual? I can make these podcasts, which are a type of conscientization, critical conscience, or consciousness raising. That's good. That's useful. I would even call that a kind of revolutionary activity, although perhaps maybe embryonic revolutionary activity, because there really is no opportunity for a revolution by the proletariat or the subaltern here in the United States. That revolution will need to begin in the third world, but not only in the third world, and that is what this podcast is about, also in indigeneity, meaning among the indigenous peoples of the world. So let's get on to what I mean by third worldism and indigenism, and why I think that both of them are important ones to be used by Maoist third worldists. Even though I've used my own term, I've coined my own term, which is something, as I said last time, I do all the time. I like coining terms. Still, it's the same tendency. My friends are Maoist third worldists. I am a Maoist third worldist. I identify with it. But what I've been trying to do is to elaborate it, to explain it further, and to introduce additional possibilities into it. So here is how I've done it. Well, third world. We've talked about that many times. The third world, the developing world, places that are not in the first world, that are relatively poor, places like India, Haiti, Gaza, places like Pakistan, places like the Dominican Republic, places like, well, much of Africa, much of Latin America. That's the third world. The third world is the poor part of the world, the poor nations of the world. Some of them are indigenous and some of them are not, or they only contain certain limited indigenous areas, but as a whole, they are not indigenous. But we'll get to the indigenism aspect of it in just a bit. So, third worldism, a vital part of Maoism, third worldism, a vital part. It is in the name. But is it enough to describe what Maoism, third worldism is? I would say that that additional term indigenism needs to be used. We need to add it. We need to add the term indigenism to Maoism, third worldism, or as I call it, socialism from below, third worldism. Why? Because there are indigenous areas that lie within the first world. There are also indigenous areas that lie within the third world. So in that case, you have a mix of third worldism and indigenism, or the mix can even be greater than that. You have a place like Gaza. Gaza is both third world and indigenous entirely. That is the population of the area. It's not like there are indigenous and non-indigenous neighborhoods. The entire area is indigenous. So there are a lot of variations that can exist. But still, indigenism or indigeneity is a vital component because it adds an ingredient to Maoism, third worldism, which I think needs to be considered. And in fact, it generally is considered, except the term indigenism is not used. So I have added that term. I use that term. look at the United States and Canada, and I will pick just one example. The Inuit peoples of both the US and Canada. They are an indigenous people, very indigenous. They live way up in the frozen north, the tundra, I guess you could say. Although they live in the first world, and by definition are first worlders, I suppose, they are not the same as me, for instance, because they, unlike me, are indigenous peoples. And so I would suggest that revolution can begin not only in third world areas, let's say third world areas that are not indigenous. I don't know, let's pick Mexico City. As far as I know, Mexico City is not an indigenous city. You know, there may be some remnants of indigenous populations living there, but Mexico City, the largest city in North America, a huge, bustling city that I will get to eventually, I think. I am only 2 miles from Mexico. I can get on a plane. The airport is only 3 miles from me, the McAllen Airport, and fly down to Mexico City. My problem is I don't speak Spanish. So if I go down there, I will need to go down there with a tour. And that's what I need to find is a tour so I can actually understand people and they can understand me. I wish I knew Spanish. But regardless, Mexico City is not in itself indigenous, but it is third world. So you have a place that is third world, but is not indigenous. Can you have a place that is indigenous and third world simultaneously? Yeah, simultaneously. Gaza, entirely. Gaza is entirely indigenous and third world, just like the Inuits are indigenous but not third world. Mexico City is third world but not indigenous. So I hope I haven't confused you. What I'm doing is I'm pointing out that those two terms are not equivalent. But I do think that revolutions can begin in either one or both of them. I see no reason why. I believe from what I have seen and my experience with indigenous people, well, for that matter, with third world people, is relatively limited. But from the many indigenous people I have known, they generally have a lot more class consciousness than those of us who are living in the first world do. Those of us who are people like me in the first world do. And so I think that we need to emphasize the possibility of revolutions occurring or beginning among the indigenous peoples of the world, or as I call it, indigeneity. That is, I think, an important factor, and it is one that should not be forgotten. And so not only discussing it, which of course Maoist third worldists have been for a long time, but actually adding indigenism to the name, which I have done. So I don't claim originality. I know that Maoist third worldists have been talking about indigenism for a long time, but the name is not a part of third worldism. So that's what I've done. I have simply added the name because I have seen who many of these indigenous people are. And I do believe that under the right circumstances, they can develop class consciousness, they can have revolutionary or dialectical potential, and perhaps, we don't know the future, but perhaps they can at some point stage revolutions. We don't know. We don't know. But perhaps they can stage revolutions just as people can who are living in Mexico City, which is third world, but not indigenous. So I believe that a a combination of both, or one or the other, can be a staging ground for revolution. That is the point that I wanted to make. And I think it is really vital that we appreciate the indigenous peoples of the world. They are people who love the land, as I have said many times before, like the Gazans. Look at how much they love the land. They are standing against an enemy with nuclear weapons, and now with an iron dome given to them by the great Donald Trump. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. And yet the Palestinians, including the Gazans, are not afraid to attack Israel, even though they know that there will at some point be material consequences. But still they stand up for their love of the land. They want Palestine back from the river to the sea, and I support them. I believe that there should be a Palestine from the river to the sea. Now, whether Israelis, especially Israeli Jews, should be permitted to live in such a Palestine of the future, should it materialize, would, in my opinion, be up to the Palestinians, not up to the Israelis. The Israelis are colonialists. It is Palestinian land that was stolen from them by the United Nations and by the US. When the US passed the deciding vote in the UN General Assembly, creating the quote-unquote state of Israel. And so there is no legitimacy to Palestine. It doesn't have any legitimacy at all. I would even say, to be honest, there really is no legitimacy to the US. I am living on stolen land myself. Now, I don't even know what stolen land. I should, but I don't know what tribes or nations lived right here in the Rio Grande Valley. Maybe I will try to find out now, but I have no idea. But this is stolen land. The United States is stolen land. Wherever there are English-speaking people or Spanish-speaking people who are not indigenous living in the Americas, they are living on stolen land. Should that land be returned? I don't know. That would be really, really hard, because you're talking about something that has been going on for hundreds of years, and more rights have been given to the indigenous people of the Americas, meaning they are not enslaved, they are not kept in prison cities, they can go where they want, but that is not true with Palestine. Palestine is a prison or prisons. And so I have no sympathy at all for Israel, despite the fact that my ancestry is Ashkenazi Jewish. No sympathy at all. There is no such thing as a promised land in the land of indigeneity. You can't steal a place from indigenous people and say, this is my promised land, and then treat the indigenous people of that area as scum, or even as many Israelis have done. It's hard for me even to say it. Call them Nazis. How in the world could an Israeli call a Gazan a Nazi? I don't understand that. I should, as somebody from a Jewish background, as someone who went to Hebrew school and was bar mitzvahed, as we say, that's not really the correct way of saying it, somebody who had a bar mitzvah. but most of us say or bar mitzvah, especially liberal or secular Jews. I was bar mitzvah. I don't understand it. And if anyone should in the US, I should. But I know some Jews who do. It's called AIPAC, which is a far right-wing movement, organization of Jews and non-Jews as well. But it's a far right-wing Jewish-oriented or Zionist organization. And I guess they understand it. I guess it makes sense to them. I don't know how. It makes no sense to me. Stealing is stealing. I thought we all learned that stealing was stealing when we were kids. I know that my parents taught me that as a child. I guess these people in AIPAC never learned that lesson. What a tragedy. What a tragedy that is happening in Gaza. Indigenous people living on indigenous land, living alongside other land that is indigenous to them, but not able to live there, being kicked out of their own land, their own sacred land, but in the spirit of indigenism, being willing to fight for it, even though they have little chance of winning. That's indigenism right there. And we see it all over the world, and we have seen it all over the world. Indigenism is the enemy of colonialism and vice versa. Colonialism is the enemy of indigenism. Colonialism destroys indigenism, or tries to, and is often successful because it has the means, usually the financial and military means, to enforce its will on the indigenous people of the land that they have stolen. So it is very sad watching Israel, which stole the land of the Palestinians, treating the Palestinians like scum, like scum. Whereas the real scum are the Israelis who treat the Palestinians like trash. They are the ones who should be condemned. They are the ones who should, in my opinion, leave. They should leave. Go someplace else. You have lost, in my opinion, your right to be there. You never had a right anyway, but if you ever had even the chance of proposing that you stay there, that is gone. That is gone. Even proposing or asking the Palestinians to remain in Palestine, to me, that is completely off the table. That should not even be considered. Those darn Israelis need to pack up their stuff, leave their houses behind, and move to some other part of the world. And no, not an indigenous part of the world either. So it's a difficult thing. It's very, very difficult watching all these things happen. But again, that is the reason why I think indigenism is a very important component to add in name to Maoism or Third Worldism. So I guess you could say Maoism, Third Worldism, Indigenism, or as I call it, Socialism from below, Third Worldism, Indigenism. Now, let me move on to talking about an additional topic, which also relates to the same theme of socialism from below, Third Worldism, Indigenism, and that is the student protest movement. This is the largest student protest movement of the 21st century. I am an old man. I remember and was a part of many protests in the New Left. So it is in my memory, it is in my conscience, in my consciousness, and in my experience. My name was taken down by the FBI when I was in one such protest. So I have direct experience doing this. It is a tragedy that, in spite of all of the things that we did in the New Left, even though I know we failed overall, that we still have not learned, and the cops have not learned. Despite the Kent State massacre, the cops are still engaging in police brutality against protesters all over the US. To me, that is totally unforgivable. Why? Why is the United States, why are American cops protesting, attacking, arresting American students for protesting the actions of another country? I mean, on face value, that makes no sense. Makes no sense at all. Israel is not, last I checked, a part of the US. In many cases, it is treated as if it is, the 51st state, but it is not a part of the US. So why is there so much concern about Israel? Why are there proposed laws to call Zionism, or anti-Zionism, I should say, racism, when anti-Zionism is simply a type of anti-nationalism? It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with nationality, not race. And there are even now many Jews, like the Satmars, who object strongly to Zionism. Are they anti-Semitic? Are they racist? Well, I guess to some people in AIPAC, to some people in the US government, the answer would be yes, even though that answer makes no sense. But making sense, I guess, is really not that important. I don't know. It is a real tragedy, and a tragedy which is continually unfolding, and a tragedy which does not seem to have any real conclusion in the offing. I hope there will be one, and I hope that the Palestinians will be the ones to win. And no, I do not want to see a deal. I do not want to see a deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis, even though a part of me realizes that not having such a deal would lead to more Palestinian deaths. So that's just what I want. But what I want is not important. Those decisions can only be made by the Gazans and by their legitimate government, Hamas. Their legitimate government, Hamas. Not a terrorist organization, a legitimate government, which has every right not to recognize Israel, which it did not for a long time because Israel stole their land. So no, I do not want to see a deal with Israel, a peace deal, because any peace deal made today will be broken tomorrow. That is the way Israel behaves. Israel is committed to its land and to expanding its land, to establishing settlements, or I guess what used to be called kibbutzes, in Palestinian land, land that was given to them by the Israelis who have stolen their own land. Again, it is a situation which literally makes no logical sense. But unfortunately, we are living in a world which makes no logical sense. So, what I hope I have done by talking about the student protest movement and the way in which there are at least some people in the first world, including many Jews, who are willing to stand up and protest the behavior of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. There are some people who are willing to do that. Some people. I wish there were more, but at least there are some. And that is what I think needs to be noted from this time. When it comes to the US, most Americans oppose the war or terrorist campaign on Gaza. I don't like the US very much. In fact, I would say I actually despise it. But I am happy that most of my fellow Americans recognize the criminality of what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza. And in fact, that is why Netanyahu has put out that, I don't know what to call it. Yeah. That peace treaty proposal. Yeah, I know what to call it. Because he wants to trick people that, yes, we want a peace treaty. We want peace with the Gazans, whereas they do not. They are still planning on going into Rafah. That is not a peace treaty. That is not an armistice. That is not an end to hostilities. That is simply delaying hostilities to a time of Israel's choosing, when it can go in, invade, and slaughter even more Palestinians, and perhaps force the rest to cross from Asia into Egypt and Africa, where there is a prison city being prepared for them even now. So that is the way Israel is treating the indigenous people of the area in which it has stolen. That is how they are doing it. We did the same thing in the US. Sadly, I don't know how to fix that. It was so long ago. So I don't know if that can be fixed. Similar situation with the Maoris of New Zealand, with the Aboriginal people of Australia, with the native Hawaiians, who are generally poor, whereas the white Hawaiians are not generally poor. So indigenism, the spirit of indigenism, which I have talked about many times, as with the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, needs to be continuously rekindled. Otherwise, it is easy to forget it. And the student movement is doing precisely that. It is rekindling the spirit of indigenism in the minds of Americans and in the minds of people across the world. I don't know if it will matter. I don't know what will happen. I hope it will be changed without more death. I hope the Israelis will simply leave, go back to where their ancestors came from, because they are not the indigenous people of Palestine. I hope. But will that happen? I doubt it. I hope that the World Court will press war crimes charges against Benjamin Netanyahu and the officers of the Israeli Defense Forces. I hope. I know they're trying to stop it. They're trying, because what that would mean is that if any of them are convicted in absentia, there would be very limited places to which they could go. Maybe the US and Russia. Outside of Israel is it. I'm not aware of any other countries. Maybe there are some, but I am not aware of any other countries that are not signatories to the World Court. That is it, as far as I know. So I guess Bibi Netanyahu, King Bibi, can come to the U.S. Members of the IDF, especially the officers, can come to the U.S. or to Russia for that matter. Good. Let them do that. That's fine. That's fine. But that would limit the ability of those people to travel. And so right now, they are trying to stop the World Court, a body to which they are not a signatory, from pressing war crimes charges against them. And you know, they may be successful. They may be successful. Why? Because most of the leaders of the first world do not seem to care about indigenous rights and the way that Israel has been trampling on them every single day. So again, indigenism, an extremely important concept, especially now with the events happening in Gaza, with the protests occurring throughout the world on college and university campuses, leading to many students and professors getting arrested. As a retired professor, I have tremendous empathy for them. I don't know if I would have the courage to be arrested. I hope I would, but I don't know. As an autistic, that might be too traumatic for me, and I know that. So that might prevent me from doing something which could get me arrested. I don't know. I hope that would not be the case. I hope if I were still working, if I had not retired from my professorship, that I would stand alongside my students and protest the actions of the Zionist entity against Gaza. So that is my justification in an expanded way for using the term socialism from below, meaning socialism from the proletariat and the subaltern, third worldism, a focus on the third world and how the third world has rights which should not be trampled on, and indigenism, a focus on the indigenous people of the world and their connection to the land. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.